Hey guys, welcome to another TFL Top 10 this time, and this one was suggested by our viewers. What is it, Nathan?
It's the top 10 used cars that you can get for under $5,000.
Yeah, because a lot of you guys are not in the market for new cars, so we thought we'd have a little bit of fun and put together a top 10 list of cars you could buy for under $5,000, but we took it a step further. Nathan and I actually went on Craigslist in Denver and actually found real cars that we would buy.
Absolutely. Now, in every case, we have some experience with these cars, one of us or both of us. So we're talking about vehicles that we've actually driven to some degree. And on top of that, these aren't your regular cars. We could easily say, go buy a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla or whatever, you know, which is a good investment. We wanted something kind of fun and different.
Yeah, we wanted something that had a little bit of, like you would say, lead in the pencil. Something that's a little bit of fun, and you know, something that makes driving more than just a commute between work and home. Something that you can have pride in ownership. And by the way, all these cars are on sale right now on Craigslist. They're really there.
They really are there. Now, remember, we went under $5,000 for these vehicles, which means lots of mileage, and they most likely will need maintenance. So before you decide to jump on and go look for certain vehicles, make sure you understand how much it costs to maintain these vehicles, and it's really easy to research online.
All right, why don't you start with number 10?
Absolutely. It's the Jeep Cherokee, the XJ. The one we found was a 2001 for $2,000.
Yeah, the XJ is a hugely popular Jeep because it was one of the very first kind of off-roady crossovers, and they built a ton of them.
It wasn't really a crossover, so to speak.
It was like before crossover.
Yeah, but the size was very similar to the size of vehicles today that are considered mid-size and small crossovers. And this is a vehicle that had straight axles, was very capable off-road, and today the aftermarket world is absolutely caked with stuff that you could put on an XJ.
Yeah, and Jeep built a lot of the transmissions for these. They built a lot of the engines for them.
Yep.
So you can find parts for them quite readily.
Yeah.
And if you get the later versions, they're actually pretty reliable. You know, it's a Jeep product, and it's an early Jeep product, so take it with a grain of salt.
Yep, but I know quite a few people have driven these things well into 200,000 miles with original engine and transmission. There are issues, and you can go onto forums and find out what these issues are. But I've driven several of these off-road, both a 4-cylinder and a 6-cylinder, and I can tell you, at least with the 6-cylinder, it's pretty impressive off-road.
Yeah, hey, I got a funny story about the XJ, which is what it is internally. I was talking to Mark Allen, and he was always amazed that people actually go and mod these things. Because when Jeep came out with this, they never actually meant it to be like a modified, like a Wrangler, right?
Yeah.
But now people are modding them, and they sort of kind of hold up.
Yeah, and it's just really inexpensive to work with. A really good starter vehicle for those of you who have never really had an off-road vehicle and want to try off-roading. Let's go to number 9.
Yeah, number 9, we found a 2001 Audi A4 for $3,000. Now, I actually owned that generation of A4, and it was a really good car. It was the first kind of A4 where it became the A4, where it had kind of that what has now become almost iconic Audi styling, both inside and out.
Right.
The downside to the A4 of that generation is they do tend to fall apart.
Yeah, and it's really hard to find one that hasn't been beat to hell. But if you can find one that was driven by a little old lady, well, I was going to say a little old lady in Pasadena, that would be bad. But by somebody who is actually going to take care of the vehicle and has the paperwork for it, it could be a hell of a first car.
Yeah, and it came with the 1.8 liter turbo, which is an engine that's been put in almost every Volkswagen Group product.
Right.
So it's a very good small displacement turbocharged engine, and it has Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system.
The funny thing about it is that generation's A4 is now the size of the current generation's A3 as vehicles, because the new A4 is considered enormous compared to the old A4.
All right, let's go to number 8, and this one, we're putting it on this list for a grain of salt, but we found a 2002 Land Rover Discovery for $3,750 on Craigslist in Denver. Now, it's a really cool car, and it's a really problematic.
I used to own one. I had a 99 with a 5-speed manual transmission, which is really rare. And actually, it was when you first met me, yeah. I had this, and it was my third vehicle, yes. My off-roader. And I loved it, except for it drained oil everywhere. The whole joke about, well, at least it has oil in it in terms of British cars. But there are a lot of issues with that vehicle, not just the engine, but electronics and whatnot. But if you can get one that's in good condition and if it's been well maintained, it's a hell of an off-road vehicle.
Yeah, I talked to a Land Rover mechanic, and he called it the Nigel factor. And I was like, Nigel factor? He goes, yeah, Nigel made this bundle too tight. Nigel, over tightened this screw. Actually, my neighbor had one, and he had a terrible time with it, so I was recommending it, but he could not get the front glass to fit in right, so it would always leak. So it's a world of issues, but it's also a really cool car, and I figure at 100, 150,000 miles, they probably had those issues sorted out by previous owners.
Possibly.
Possibly.
It's a really good idea for those of you who are looking at possibly getting one, to get one that hasn't been off-roaded too much. It's not so much the fact that there could be issues with the suspension or the drivetrain, which is pretty good. It's more of a factor of a lot of the people who take them off-road have no idea what they're doing. They tend to be,
yeah, they're novices.
They're novices. All right, let's move on to the next one. Speaking of off-roading.
Yeah, we found a 88 Suzuki Samurai tin top for $3,500 basically on Craigslist. I had a Samurai. I'd love to own one of them. They're tiny. It's like the affordable poor man's Jeep Wrangler. Perfect off-road, kind of hard on-road because it's got such a short wheelbase that it really rides hard. The problem is you can't find one that's not molested.
That's right. It's one of the tough things about these vehicles is that they've been absolutely butchered by a lot of people for good reason, to make them even more off-road capable.
People turn them into rock crawlers.
Oh, they do indeed. But here's the thing about it. First of all, I have this whole theory. People run out and buy those Razors, 4-passenger, 5-passenger Razors for $20,000 plus. Get a Samurai, a used Samurai like this, put the money into it, and you'll be able to legally drive it in all 50 states. You'll be able to drive it every day. They get pretty good mileage. Off-road, they're fantastic. You got to be careful on road because it's such a narrow wheelbase that
that's what killed them.
Back in the day, that's exactly what killed them, was the fact that people were turning at high speeds and they were flipping. So just simply keep that in mind and maybe you won't flip them. And by the way, when he said tin top, what that basically means is, unlike some of the Samurais which had a removable hard or soft top, this one is solid. It actually has a metal roof that is connected to the whole body so you can't remove it.
I have a funny story about my Samurai. I moved to Washington, D.C. and I had the soft top, and a friend of mine, we were going for a graduate school for journalism, and so we couldn't find a place to live, and we ended up living on Main Street, M-A-I-N-E, which is a marina. We lived on a sailboat,
right? Which
at that time was not a great, it was southwest or southeast, I forget. It was southwest, I think. It was not a great part of Washington. And so a friend of mine who's in my graduate school program asked me to bring his toaster oven with him. And now keep in mind that this Samurai's top had like snaps, right? So you put, it's like one of those little snaps that you twist. Mm-hmm. So, and you could take it off. So I put the toaster oven in the Jeep, got to the marina, parked it in the parking lot, brought all my stuff down, left it in the Jeep thinking, hey, it's just a toaster oven. And some brain surgeon out there actually cut my top to get to the toaster oven. They could have easily unsnapped it, but they cut the top to get to the toaster oven, and it pissed me off and it pissed off my friend because he thought I owed him a toaster oven, and I thought he owed me a
new top,
which is much more expensive.
Yeah, but that's the same thing you'll fall into with any convertible that's out there with a soft top. A quick story about a Samurai that I have is that one time on a trail in Gorman, California, which is right by where I went to school for a while, I came down with a bunch of buddies. We were off-roading in Jeeps and big trucks, and there was this one little guy in an absolute standard Samurai, and he was cruising around, and every single time we came up to something we couldn't go over, that we would go around, he would just toddle over it real slow, but he would make it over it. And it finally got to a point where we were getting really sick and tired of having him show us up on every single obstacle. It wasn't a him. It was a her. It was a 16-year-old girl, and it was her first time ever going off-road. True story.
That's one of the biggest things that people don't take into account when they go off-road is that center of gravity and being light is as important off-road as it is in a sports car. So everybody buys a Jeep and they slap on big bumpers.
6,000-pound Jeep.
Yeah. And these things are super light, and they just kind of just tiptoe over the rocks.
Yeah, it's a really, really cool truck. Technically a truck. But speaking of
number 6?
Yeah, why don't you tell them this is a good one?
Yeah, so number 6 is the Volvo 850. This one was a GLT. We found in '96 for $1,500. I actually owned an 850 Turbo, which was, that is the car that's the definition of like rock solid, built out of one piece, but will not go around a turn.
So why want to go around a turn?
Because the Turbo had a lot of horsepower. It had a 5-cylinder turbocharged engine, but it was not dynamically very well sorted. So in a straight line, great. Around a turn, not so great. But it was extremely safe. It was extremely comfortable. and it is extremely cool. I think it's one of those cars that, along with the Saab 900 Turbo, I think, which will become valuable at some point.
We talked about putting the Saab on this list, and it just missed out on it, but it belongs here as well. A couple of the different Saabs that are out there. But the one thing I can tell you about the Volvos are, first of all, even the old ones are so much safer than other vehicles that were made at the same time. They're really, really well made. The company has cared about safety for years. The only negative that I can think of is that maintenance is a little expensive. It's far more expensive than, say, a Honda Civic or something like that. But with that being said, you get a well-made, well-maintained Volvo of any style, of any class, and you'll have a safe car.
Yeah, and also the best, from my point of view, and most comfortable seats in the car biz.
I like the Saab car seats myself. What is the Swedish drinking to make such good seats?
I don't know, man, but they know how to do ergonomics. All right, let's go to number 5, and this is a great car that's no longer being made, I fear.
Well, we both agree that finding this on the list is a real diamond in the rough. However, we're pretty sure that there's a lot of mileage and a little bit of abuse, and that is the Nissan Xterra. The one we found is a 2001, which is the first generation, for $3,199, $3,199. Now, going against what they're normally worth, that is considerably less expensive than you might think. But remember that a vehicle like this very well may have been off-road a lot.
Yeah, but they're really solid and really dependable and really straightforwardly, simply put together. This is like now we're looking probably a 15-year-old truck, right?
Yeah.
And they built a lot of them, so parts are readily available. There's an aftermarket. It's a Nissan. It's not going to kill you up in maintenance. It will kill you in it's thirsty, right?
Yeah, they're thirsty, and the dynamics driving on the road isn't great, but it's a truck, and it's based on the Nissan Frontier, and all the parts that are available for the Frontier, most of them will fit on the Xterra.
All right, this next car represents a whole bunch of different cars, and here's the irony about this car. You will be upside down at the second you pay for it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
So we found a BMW 740 2003 for $5,500, but we figure you can get them down.
You can probably get them down to about 5,000, which is how we wound up on the list.
With 170K.
170,000 miles.
But it is a 740i.
That's the big one.
Yeah.
So this huge BMW with all this mileage, is it worth it? Well, it depends. I mean, obviously you're going to pay a lot of money to maintain this vehicle. Just changing the components that are regular is 2-3 times what it would cost on a regular car. So that's the first thing you have to think about. But the second thing is, you still have, if you have it well maintained, a dynamic car that handles well, and in this case, a big car that's just like a proper saloon.
Yeah, the 740 of that generation weren't very popular, right? BMW hadn't quite figured out luxury yet. They'd figured out the sports car part of it, but they hadn't figured out luxury. So the 3 Series, the 5 Series was really popular, but the 7 Series not so much. So they plummeted in value and cost relatively quickly compared to, say, an S-Class Mercedes.
Right.
But they're actually really good cars, and if it wasn't for the fact that you actually have to go and have a BMW mechanic work on them.
Pretty much, a German mechanic at the very least.
Yeah, but if I were 17, man, they'd be cruising.
That'd be pretty
740,
with all that extra power and everything else. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of German cars, our next one is a Volkswagen Jetta VR6.
Yeah, we found a 2002 for $3,450 on Craigslist in Denver, and that engine is a gem.
The engine alone is worth the price of admission if it's been well taken care of, because it is one of their best engines ever.
And unlike the BMW, it's a Volkswagen, so parts are readily available. Everybody knows about them. You don't need to have a specially trained mechanic. They're relatively straightforward.
Yep.
The engine's a little bit more expensive to maintain, but it's the car itself is like a sleeper, right? Because it looks like a regular Jetta.
Yep.
And unless you know what you're looking for, you don't understand that thing is a really fun performance drive.
Properly quick.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, this next one's not very fast. However, it's what I would call a very safe bet. It's right up there with the Volvo in terms of being safe, and at the same time, it has a little bit more utility that makes it very friendly to places like Colorado. And that's the Subaru Outback. And the one we found was a 2000, which is for $2,000. But it also has 140,000 miles on it. Now, some of you guys are probably wondering, well, what's the mileage cutoff before you have to really start worrying? It's impossible to say for sure. Some cars can go 250,000 miles on the same transmission and engine. Other cars can barely make it past 90,000 miles before everything craters. The one thing you can say about at least Subarus is that they tend to be very reliable up to around 100,000 miles. This is a popular consensus. And then things have to be replaced, such as certain types of components inside the engine All right, keep that in mind. So make sure it's been properly maintained before even considering it.
Yeah, plus it's the kind of car where you don't feel bad about like door dings, you know. I mean, this is true for a lot of used cars,
yeah.
but especially that one, right? It's got the utility of a wagon.
Yep.
It's got the all-wheel drive in the winter, and you don't feel bad about like stuffing your dog or your friend's dog in the back of it. You know, if your dog pukes in the back of it, you're like, all right, you pee the back of my Outback. Yeah.
and here's the funny thing: in Colorado, we find a lot of those up at the ski slopes with like the roof rack filled with skis worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and the cars are rusting to pieces, but still making it up to the slopes. So it's kind of a popular sight here.
All right, and I think you guys can figure out the #1 car because we actually owned it for a while.
Yeah.
It's the Jeep Wrangler YJ, and if you can, YJ, I think it was the last year was 95. If you can, look for a TJ, which is the one before the JK, which is the current model.
Right.
But those are relatively reliable vehicles. We had ours. It had 140,000 miles on it. I think we put like 10,000 miles on it over the course of a year and a half that we had it.
Yeah.
And you know, it ate a little bit of oil, but you hated the transmission. It's a 3-speed short flight,
yeah,
which was you know, pretty miserable on the highway, but around town it was fine.
Yeah, that's true.
And that straight 6 is actually not a bad little engine.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself if you're serious about off-roading. You know, I still say the XJ is like such a great way to go if you're just starting out. But of course, a TJ or a YJ is you know, a great vehicle to get. And if you can get one that hasn't been overly baked with too many lifts and springs and all these other things, if it's fairly stock, I think that'd be a great way to go, because then you can be the one who modifies it and, you know, maintains the vehicle.
Yeah, ours was automatic, but at that vintage, it's probably more likely to be a manual, which is cool. The top, of course, comes off, so you have a convertible.
That's right.
You could do that cool bikini top thing. There's just a million different ways you can change it and update it, and you know, make it your own. And so. You know, safety-wise, it didn't have airbags, but it was a pretty hefty truck, so it had a lot of metal around you.
Once you learn how to drive them properly and understand that you're not driving a sports car, they're pretty damn good.
Full roll bar.
Yeah, full roll bar.
Yeah.
Now, this next one is also an off-road vehicle, and this is our bonus.
Yep, go for it. And this is one that you see everywhere here in Colorado, and they built them like in one color, which is silver. But,
no, seriously.
But they're
sometimes
great,
white.
But they're great cars for under $5,000.
This is the 1999 Toyota 4Runner. Now, the one we found was for $4,499. It was really clean, but it also had, get this, 298,000 miles on it. That is a lot. But it also speaks volumes for the vehicle. We've talked about Toyota reliability before, and this is a really good example of that. This vehicle will sell. I have a feeling it won't go for $44.99. I would imagine maybe in the high threes. But still, think about it. That's incredible.
Yeah, I actually own this vehicle, the 4Runner,
that's
that
right,
generation.
You did, yeah.
And you know, it wasn't fancy, but it was bulletproof. That 6-cylinder, you just felt like it would go forever. It had a basic 4-wheel drive system, so it had a proper transfer case. You know, and everything was like overbuilt on it.
Yep, and that's one of the reasons why these things last so long and go for so long.
And it was one of those magic Japanese vehicles that actually was somewhat bigger on the inside than on the outside. So even though it's, you know, right now probably a mid-sized truck, back then it was considered relatively big, and you could put 5 people in, you know, pretty good comfort, and there's stuff in the back.
Didn't the rear window go down into the tailgate?
The rear window goes down. Now I know a little bit about these trucks. The fenders tend to rust out because water gets into them, and so in the points like where the water stays in the corners, you'll see a lot of them with like rust damage.
Right.
But those are easily replaceable.
Yes, they are.
So you know, if you see rusty fenders, don't freak out. You can replace them. They're ultimately off-road worthy because you can do a lot to them, and you can get them in the SR5 model, which it was kind of the more expensive, upgraded one. The one I had a 6-speed manual transmission, I think, which was
a 6-speed, really?
Maybe it was 5-speed.
I think it might have been 5-speed.
Might have been 5-speed back then, yeah. Yeah, but it was just fine. Thirsty, but otherwise really good.
So, guys, we really appreciate that you guys came up with this for us. You really did. You suggested that we come up with vehicles that were used for under a certain amount of money. So if this is a popular video, we may continue doing these as well.
Let us know in the comments below. And if you guys are yearning for like more non-list videos, we've got a lot of stuff over on TFL Truck and our new YouTube channel, TFL Now. Click above to go there, where Nathan does his Ask Nathan series, and we also do like 0 to 60s and behind the scenes and live videos coming very soon. And remember, check out tflcar.com for more news, views,
and real-world reviews.
On this edition of Hot or Not, we have a very special episode because we have a very special guest star. And I'm not talking about Paul, I'm talking about this, the brand spanking new Porsche Cayman GT4. And this Porsche has the possibility of setting a track record, and that is coming up right now. So buried midships is the Carrera S engine. It's a 3.8 liter boxer that puts out 385 horsepower and 310 pound-foot of torque. Now this particular Cayman has a 6-speed manual transmission, and Paul calls this engine, well, he calls it perfection. It powers the rear wheels and it should set a track record, we think.